Hi, I'm Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here today with Jason Lamb, who is a managing partner at Hard Yards, which is a product development consultancy and management advisory company. Very interesting group, and we're going to learn a little bit more about both the company and Jason. And Jason, welcome.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate you having me today.
Good. Why don't we start with a real brief summary of what you do, and then I'd like to dig into some of your very interesting background and the work that you've done in your career.
Well, we're a management consulting firm that focuses on product development, and that really is using human-centered design methods to uncover unmet end user needs and agile software development practices. We're framework agnostic, but Scrum, Kanban, XP, all different frameworks around agile delivery that we work with clients to implement, and then increasingly focusing on measurement of outcomes, typically using the OKR framework, and then helping people implement business intelligence systems to meter and monitor their outcomes.
Now, Jason, you and I met. We were working on a project together, and I found out about your background. I said, "Wow, you're pretty awesome. Let's do a video." So, hence we're here. But let's go back. Take us back. You're a former Navy SEAL, and you were in business school. Tell us how that sort of prompted some of the work that you did both in government and now in your company. Share a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so in government, I'd always sort of been involved in technology projects. I commanded a SEAL team that had an exercise we called Trident Spectre that was focused on technology transition. So we'd set up operational experiments and bring in technology from sort of SOCOM units and the intelligence community to test things out and figure out where we should invest. And then going to business school, took an entrepreneurial thinking class and had the ability to do an independent project where I focused on diving deeper into that for SOCOM to look for ways to apply commercial practices to improve technology transition. And the use case was based on a friend of mine who was chartered to build an Iron Man suit for SOCOM, and I was participating on some of his initial engagement. First off with the Squad X program at DARPA, and really saw that there was some dysfunction in the general awareness of where the federal government was investing in technologies and how that could be leveraged internally, and at the same time a growing awareness that the increased research and development in the commercial sector was largely untapped at that time. This is back in around 2014 by the government. And Defense Department's done a great job of focusing more on how to bring commercial technologies into the federal space. But that's where I got first exposed to design thinking and to agile methodology, and ultimately came to the conclusion that if the government's spending so much money in this new cutting edge tech, that we really needed to be using these commercial product development best practices to help get the biggest bang out of the government's buck.
It definitely makes sense, this idea that really highly functioning teams like SEALs come up with best practices and come up with models for how to achieve an objective or to make some project succeed. I know you've told me a little bit about some of the models and methodologies that you've applied from that world into the business community. Give us some examples of that. You had a really good one around like these stages of maturity that in these old Japanese models. Really fascinating. Tell us a little bit about that. I think it's so interesting.
Well, my partner Mark Pershinsky is a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and there's a Japanese term called shu-ha-ri. Shu is the first stage of maturity, which is to learn the rules. Ha is to break the rules, to apply the practices in context, and Ri is to abandon the rules. And you can look at this as a capability maturity model. But one of the things, and yet to be known whether or not this is an effective business practice, because most companies split out their training arm from consulting arms. But we really believe that first we need to baseline people in theory and lexicon so that they understand sort of emerging best practices before we can effectively, in context, apply these rules. But foundationally, folks should start applying a framework to the problems they're working on, stick within the bounds of a given framework, apply it in context, and then once they've sort of learn from that and start to modify the frameworks in context. But oftentimes we see people try to sort of jump too far ahead in the maturity model before they're organizationally, culturally ready for it.
Now, a lot of companies come to you asking for assistance around their product, right? Where they're saying, how do I optimize the product? Tell me how you guys approach that at Hard Yards. Like, how do you deal with product managers or teams that are building? I assume a lot of it's software, but where you're in there to optimize. Take us through a typical sort of engagement. How do you handle those, and what can someone watching now maybe learn from your experience?
Well, initially when we would do an assessment, so typically we'll start with the client, we'll do an assessment of sort of what their current state is, and they were largely qualitative when we started. So we'd use, an online survey to collect some data, and then we would do both individual and group interviews and look to synthesize that to develop insights for the organization and make recommendations. Now what we've layered in is a quantitative view of the organization. So oftentimes when people are building software, they're using Jira as the tool that nobody likes but everybody uses, and we'll pull data from Jira to see their historic performance, and then we can actually use that to forecast their backlogs, to do a probabilistic assessment of when they'll get things done. And oftentimes this combination, the synthesis of both the qualitative view of the organization and then what you see foundationally in the data about the organization's performance, really provides great insights around what you can do to help organizations. So if they're early in the capability and sort of maturity model, we'll start with baseline training. And then if folks are more mature, we're working with a financial customer right now that's got better foundational practices, but we apply what we call an accelerator, which is 12 weeks of structured coaching, and we have these around the product owner role or product management role, around the role of a scrum master, and a scaling accelerator for folks that are trying to apply these things at scale. And in this case, we break down modules into sort of micro learning, about an hour and a half a week, that we allow, we expose clients either in functional groups or in teams to theory, and then we let them practice it for a week. They put that into practice and come back to us with feedback on what worked, what didn't work, before we introduce another concept for them to apply and practice. And we found that that's a really effective way of getting people to uptake and apply these skills to their practices.
Is data a precondition or absolute necessity here? It would seem to me that for you guys to be helpful to a client, they would have to have some data that you guys can analyze. Is that generally the case?
Generally not the case, or if it's or if they have it, it's often
they need to go get it.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of a client we're working with right now, and they're pretty advanced, but the Jira inputs like begin with start and up until test, but then they do test to delivery all outside of the Jira tool. So you don't get, and it's very rare to find folks that have structured their data in the tool in a way that you can roll it up at the team level, to the sort of program or team of teams level, and then up to the enterprise level. Very rare to have good governance and standardization of that data. So if they have it, it's probably not structured in a way that's great for analysis.
So
but that's part of what we assess.
If they're doing product development and listening right now, they shouldn't be embarrassed if they don't have their ducks in order. So that's good. That's probably good for business. Hey, you'd mentioned the government, and I know you'd spent some time at DARPA, as you mentioned. Well, what's your observation about the government's kind of support for innovation and kind of forward-looking thinking and being creative? What's a lot of us think government, we immediately think the opposite of all those adjectives, not creative, not for all of that. Give us your assessment. Are we getting better in the United States? Are we getting worse? What would be your prognosis?
I think our understanding of where we need to move has gotten a lot better, but it is slow to implement to change. So I don't know that process is entirely caught up with where we'd like to be. But DARPA is a shining example of how it can work, and from the beginning they were structured well. So some insights from DARPA that I didn't fully understand prior to getting a chance to work there is it's $3.2 billion of largely discretionary spending, which is very rare in the government. Most programs, Congress has allocated like what the money's going to be spent is already determined. Where DARPA gets that budget largely to explore new scientific areas. So a couple things. There's the DARPA building. There is no lab. It's a program management building. They outsource to academia or contractors, all the work that is done. There's no basement with all the secret technology. It exists in industry from their projects. There are a few thousand people at DARPA, but only 200 are actually government employees. 100 of which are program managers, and the average program is around $70 million, and a program manager will manage a couple of those. 100 of the government employees are sort of back office support and infrastructure for those PMs, and the rest are contractors. And the rotation there is pretty frequent to make sure that talent is rotating, out of the building with new ideas coming in frequently. So they've done some really sound structural planning around how to drive innovation from their space, and I think they've got a great track record of delivering, new technologies. So that works really well.
As you look at the different companies that you work with doing product development, what are some of the areas that are really hot? I mean, I know you and I met in the context of cybersecurity. I would assume that's one of the hot areas, but that and others, what do you see popping up, and what are some of the areas in the coming years that we can expect to see some exciting new capabilities in?
Well, I think one of the things, the general data literacy, certainly in the government, but commercially as well, has improved, and the appetite for measurement has grown. If you've read the book Measure What Matters by John Doerr, like this OKR framework is very popular today. We think it's a great framework for applying, for measuring the outcomes of a product. And then the desire to measure performance is largely growing. So we see big demand there. There's also a thing called OBIA. I don't know if you've heard of the term OBIA before. This was grown out of the Toyota lean manufacturing process, really when they were building the Prius, and it's around how you visualize your work. So having a BIA room or a war room centers around the strategy of an organization. You can have it set up to view how you deliver value and how you measure that value as an anchoring place to show your strategic alignment. And it's really sort of nuts. In the last just month, we've had both commercial and federal actors asking us for help in this visualization of their strategy and their process, which is, I think, a great trend.
Now, Jason, for people who are watching here who might have some interest in what you guys do at Hard Yards, what's the best way for them to be in touch with you?
Our website is hardyards.com, and it's not a landscaping company. The term Hard Yards was derived from days of tall ships and a crew working together to get the canvas to the highest yard arms on the mast. It gets increasingly difficult to get to the top. So hardyards.com is probably the best way to reach out to us.
That's a really good backstory on the name. It's nice when there's some meaning behind the name and the domain. Well, listen, Jason, I certainly hope some people who are watching, who are involved in product development and could use your assistance and would like to work with a SEAL. I hope they're in touch with you. I hope you get some reach out as a result of our discussion. And I want to thank you for making time for us today.
Thanks, Ed. It was good talking to you. I appreciate it.
It was great to speak with you as well. And for the rest of you, we'll see you next time.